Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, May 20th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 105 days. The game against Michigan in 191 days. We're about 2 weeks away from what could be the biggest tidal wave of official and unofficial visits in college football recruiting history. The buildup from 15 months of dead period will finally end in June, and it should lead to one of the craziest months ever in an always crazy world of recruiting. But before that happens, we want to take stock of where things stand right now with the Buckeyes and some of their commits and top targets. My guest today is Buckeye Scoop recruiting analyst Alex Gleitman. He just wrote his weekly ADEC column about this exact topic. Hey, that worked out neatly. How Ohio State was trending with some of the biggest names in the nation. So, Alex, let's start with the very biggest name in the class of 2022, the number one overall player in the country, according to every major recruiting service, including the Scoop 100, Quinn Ewers. Is there any cause for concern at all about Quinn Ewers' commitment to Ohio State right now?
Right now, absolutely not. He's coming on June 4th through 6th for his official visit with most of the class. There's a few guys who aren't able to make it that weekend, but from everything I'm hearing, all is well with Ohio State. Has there been, call it, minor contact here and there with some other staffs? Absolutely. I think, to be honest, if it was my kid, I think you're absolutely closing the door on anything. God forbid something happens with Ohio State down the road. I think, you're foolish, although someone like Quinn Ewers, it doesn't really matter when he says he wants in your class. You're going to take him up until the very last point. But from everything I'm hearing, he's very happy with Ohio State. He's close with the guys in the class, Ryan Day, Corey Dennis, et cetera, et cetera. And so zero concern on my end, despite some scuttlebutt maybe on some other sites around the nation, some other teams' boards and things like that. But I have Quinn Ewers solid to Ohio State as things stand as we record this podcast.
All right, so next one up is wide receiver Caleb Brown. He is a top 100 wide receiver from Illinois. He was someone who I think everyone just had kind of like penciled into Michigan's class until pretty recently, but it sounds like that may have now changed.
Yeah, I think Ohio State's been trending for a few months. They've always been right there, but I think Michigan was the team to beat. And I don't know if it was a matter of staff shakeups in Ann Arbor or just kind of the downward trend of that program, continuous downward trend of that program. But, I think Caleb Brown is someone that Ohio State's actually in good position to land if they want to make a push when he makes his official visit in June. And at this point, we don't have any sort of prediction tool at Buckeye Scoop. Hopefully that comes down the road, but I think all of us would probably have it on Ohio State if we had to pick a school right now for Caleb Brown.
All right, now let's move to the offensive line. Five-star tackle Zach Rice. He was the number one offensive lineman in the Scoop 100 that Mark and Bill just released. Obviously someone that a lot of people on staff think very, very highly of. He is visiting Columbus the first weekend of June. Bill Green has sounded a little bit more optimistic about the Buckeyes' chances with him recently. What are you hearing about Zach Rice?
Yeah, I'm not seeing it. Let me see if he shows up to campus first off. If he does, I think Ohio State's got puncher's chance, we'll call it. He's always spoken very highly of Ohio State since he's gotten the offer. I spoke with him right after he got the offer. His mom was super excited when he got that Ohio State offer, and that's always big to me. Greg Studraro has actually done a pretty, I think things were rocky at first, I would say. I know that there were some comments Zach made early on social media that he hadn't heard from Stud and things like that, but I think Mark Pantoni might have given him a kick in the butt, and I think that relationship's been decent. I think Ohio State's been putting in the effort. I know the commits have absolutely been all over Zach Rice. He's one of those non-committed guys who's in a big group chat with a bunch of them, but I've heard North Carolina. I've heard Notre Dame for quite a while. Obviously, there's some other national players in this recruitment that are going to make things interesting. So let me see him show up to campus June 4th through 6th, and I'll put it in a very doubtful to a unlikely category, and then I'll see how the official visit goes from there.
When very doubtful is an improvement, that's not great. But yeah, I'm just thinking back to last year, like Tristan Lee, another five-star offensive tackle. He was kind of always talking about Ohio State, and then they had their Buckeye Bash where all the guys showed up, and then Tristan Lee didn't show up. It was like, okay, watch what they do, not necessarily what they say. Sounds like it might be the same thing with Zach Rice. Another offensive lineman, Keontae Goodwin. He is from Indiana. He was considered close to an Ohio State lock at one point, it seemed like, and then he committed to Kentucky recently. So how likely is it that the Buckeyes can flip him back?
Yeah, I thought, even when he committed to Kentucky, sources inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center were confident they were going to get a visit from him. And to me, I was like, oh, well, if that happens, that's a pretty good chance for the flip, considering we had been hearing Ohio State was in good position for a while. But the more I dig into this one, the more I am less confident. I just think it's trending down. I know that you got to win over his mom. And I think both Kentucky and Michigan State have an edge with the mom. over Ohio State. And you're kind of sitting there like, why in the world would someone go to Kentucky or Michigan State over Ohio State at a position of need where he can walk into the 2 deep, I think, from day one at either left tackle or right tackle, and maybe even compete for a job. Who knows? And that's a good question, but I think it's just relationship building. And I think Kentucky and Michigan State have done a really good job with Keonta's mom. And I think that's the key to the recruitment, is winning her. And so I think if Ohio State can get them on campus and Ryan Day can win over the mom, I think there's a chance there. So I'm not calling it dead and over, but I am saying it's less likely than I think I would have said a month.
All right. So before we have people jumping off the roof, let's get some people some good news. Defensive side of the ball, there may be some much better news coming from the Buckeyes on 5-star defensive end Omari Abor out of Texas. He sounded like he was all Oklahoma semi-recently. I mean, that was, I think we talked about him on the show with Greg Powers and Bill Green a couple weeks ago, and he was sort of looking like more Oklahoma than anything else at that point. But it sounds like that may be shifting now. So what are you hearing about him?
Yeah, I got to give Ben credit. I think he did a great job in kind of digging up some things on Omari Abor, and he wrote that in his bank blog earlier in the week. And for me, I was just asking people that I know that are pretty closely connected to the Oklahoma staff about this one. And the vibes I got was they were not as confident as, the crystal balls and the future cast and all those things were pointing strongly to Oklahoma. And so I had just heard that he was open. I know that people down there felt if he didn't stay in the region that Ohio State was going to be the pick. He's got an official visit coming up in early June, and I think Ohio State has a great shot to land him. So I would say this one is trending up when it comes to Ohio State and their chances for Omari Abor. I'm not saying I'm calling him to the Buckeyes just yet. I want to see how the visits goes and things like that. But Ohio State's done really well in that region in the state of Texas. And I think that Caleb Burton, Quinn Ewers, they're gonna make a guy like that feel comfortable being in this class, going away from home, as well as some of the other guys they already have on campus. So I feel pretty good about this one. I think Larry Johnson has a strong relationship with him, and I think it's trending in the right direction.
All right, another defensive lineman, another Larry Johnson special, Caden Curry, defensive lineman who they just seem to love out of Indiana. He's someone I know Mark Givler and Tony Gerdman went and saw play early last season and came away super impressed. What's the latest on Caden?
Yeah, I with Caden, I've had Ohio State as the leader, and no change there for me. I know there's been talk about he's going to take all his visits and he's going to take it into the fall and go see some games and make a decision in the fall. I think a lot of these kids, ideally in their minds, are like, oh yeah, fall would be great. Now he's a kid that Ohio State, I think, would take up until the second signing day. They would wait for him. They really like him a lot, but I personally think I could see this one ending in the summer if he makes it to campus, which I expect him to do at some point. And I think he's going to be a Buckeye.
All right. And one current commit who has been a hot topic recently is Jyaire Brown. He is a cornerback out of Cincinnati. That's actually a fairly complicated situation. Can you explain kind of what's going on with him right now and what that might mean for the Buckeyes?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very similar to Devontae Smith last year, the cornerback from Cincinnati, LaSalle, who ended up committing to Ohio State and then decommitted, ended up signing with Alabama. Good for him. But that was an interesting choice for other reasons that we won't get into now. But Jyaire Brown, I think, is in a similar position where he's seeing Ohio State probably go with 5-6 defensive backs, and they're really good defensive backs. And he's, maybe he's not feeling a ton of love. He's been committed a while. Maybe he's sitting there saying, these are really good players. Can I go somewhere else where it's maybe going to be a little less competitive in what will be a young Ohio State defensive back room over the next couple of years and maybe get a chance to see the field earlier? I think Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame has done a tremendous job in recruiting him. And so it's given him a lot to think about. And then from a personal standpoint, not to get too much into these kids' personal lives, but his father recently passed away. Unfortunately, your heart goes out to the kid for that. And, you hope all is well. It seems like he's been struggling with that, as he naturally should be. Via some of the things he's posted on social media. So that's got to factor into this decision as well. And, you start thinking about needing to support for your family and being the man in the house, but also his family's now in Cincinnati. Does he want to be a little bit closer to them at Ohio State, hour and a half, maybe even a little bit less versus a couple hour drive to Notre Dame, not too far. So I think there's a lot of things going on in this recruitment. And I spoke to some people very close to Notre Dame over the weekend, and we both feel it's 50-50. I do expect him to take a visit out to South Bend. I think Ohio State, from their standpoint, is we'd love to have you. We're not running you out of the class. But if you want to leave, we're not chasing you. And I think that was the same message to Devontae Smith. If you don't feel like you could play here, or you feel like you have a chance to get on the field earlier and you don't want to come compete, go for it. We're not going to chase you. But I think Ohio State would like to have him. And I imagine with everything he's going through, they've been in a lot of contact with him and just making sure he's okay as a human being, forget him as a football player. So that's going to be one to watch through the summer. He's supposed to be on campus for his official visit, June 4th through 6th weekend. That could be a visit where he just, it feels like family, all the guys there, the coaching staff, everyone on campus all at once. And he just says, I'm a Buckeye. That's it. I feel good about the plan moving forward with Coach Barnes and Coach Coombs. So let's see what happens coming out of that visit to Ohio State, and if any other visits actually do happen.
Yeah, that first weekend in June is when they've got an awful lot of those committed players in. They've got some of the other big targets like Zach Rice coming in that weekend. That's going to be a monster weekend for Ohio State recruiting. Let's end with a pair of safeties. The first is Zion Branch. He's a top 50 player from Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas. You may remember that high school from such players as Haskell Garrett and Tate Martell. There are a lot of very big names after Zion. So where are things with him in the Buckeyes right now?
Yeah, I think Ohio State has a better chance than most people think. I know a lot of people have him ticketed to stay at the West Coast, maybe to USC, but his dad was played in the league, and they're going about this in a very business-like approach. This isn't a geographic decision. It's not a heartstring decision. I mean, geographics always play into it. You want to be closer to your family, but at the end of the day, I could see him. I think Ohio State feels like they have a realistic shot, and they absolutely would take him, and they would absolutely take the next guy we spoke about. Despite having Kai Stokes already committed at safety, they would go to 3 safeties for these 2 guys that we're going to be talking about. So I think this visit, the official visits overall, are going to tell the tale. And if he feels Ohio State is the best place for him coming out of those visits, I think he's going to commit to Ohio State. I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying he's going to Ohio State based on the intel now. I would take the field over Ohio State, and I would probably pick USC if I had to pick one school. I do think they're doing a good job with him, as they've done with a lot of guys in the West Coast the last cycle or two. But I do think this is not one that's just a visit for the sake of saying I visited Ohio State. I think this is a business trip, and he's going to take a real close look at Ohio State.
All right, you mentioned the last safety. The last safety is Xavier Wanpa. He is out of Iowa. He's someone who I think Ohio State fans have just kind of had like penciled in the class for quite a while. And then there was some information that was like, maybe that's not quite such a lock as people might have thought. So what are you hearing about Xavier?
Yeah, it was interesting because he was, I had intel, and I was wrong. I could admit it, that he was going to take a self-guided tour at one point in the offseason. I think that was the plan, and things changed just because that's what happens, especially during a global pandemic. But he did go down to Texas A&M, and I think they are a real player in this recruitment. I know Notre Dame's in it. There's a couple other schools, and he's going to take his visits, but he is going to get to Ohio State. He's really close with a bunch of the guys in the class. He played 7-on-7 with Keon Grays, even though he's Arizona. They played on the same team in the 7-on-7 circuit throughout this entire spring, and they got really close. And I just think Ohio State is the team to beat. Again, to your point, it's not done and over. They're definitely going to have to fend off a number of other teams, but I'm gonna pick them to Ohio State right now. That's where my forecast is if I had to make one. And I'd have a solid degree of confidence in there. I think, I hate the percentage game, but I would say I would be at like 75% on that one. I think that they're in good shape, and someone could come in with an awesome visit and just completely change things because that's recruiting. But I think it's Ohio State's to lose. That's a good way to put it.
There is going to be an awful lot that looks different a month from now. That's why we're kind of doing our check-in right now. And then once the visits start, we'll kind of reevaluate where everything stands with a lot of these guys at the end of June. Alex, thank you for joining me and kind of filling in some of the blanks there for folks. And if you are listening to this and thinking, man, that was a lot of information. That was 9 guys, 9. Alex wrote about 46 of them this week, 46, including 5-star corners, Will Johnson, Damani Jackson, a ton of other names. This is not like, they just read through the 9 guys and then there's a bunch of filler. Like, no. Alex is writing about a ton of the top players at all sorts of positions. I think he had 5 or 6 running backs in there. Like, who's going to be the running back in this class? Who's looking more likely? Who's looking less likely? All the way across the field, 46 guys. But the only way you can read that full report is you have to be a member of BuckeyeScoop.com. That is just one of the great pieces of info this week on our Ask the Insiders board. Bill Green's turning out great stuff. Mark Givler's turning out great stuff. Nevada's had a couple really interesting nuggets on off-season workouts and guys who, a guy who has dropped, I think, 60 pounds, something like that, who is really, really impressing the strength staff, a name that you haven't necessarily heard a lot about, who is maybe looking like he might be someone who can contribute in the future. That was all on our Ask the Insiders board at BuckeyeScoop.com. But you have to be a member. So why don't you sign up to be a member today? Because, as I said off the top, this might be the craziest month in college football recruiting history that we're heading into. Wouldn't you like to have a team of insiders there to tell you what's actually going on these visits and what's happening and what it all means? You can get that all at BuckeyeScoop.com. You can also get that on our great podcasts. You can find those on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. Alex does the Around the Oval podcast, where he has guests on every week. A lot of recruits on, a lot of NFL draft analysts, all sorts of really, really interesting guests. That's one you're definitely going to want to check out. Tony Gerderman and I do Buckeye Weekly. That's we did one yesterday on the some of the early season lines and point spreads, and making some picks and throwing together some ridiculous, irresponsible parlays and some over early season lines. We're going to have another episode later on today on the Ohio State freshman on offense, and which, who's going to redshirt, who's going to maybe play enough to not redshirt, who has a chance to maybe break into the starting lineup. That'll come out a little later on today. And we get a ton of other great podcasts as well. You can find them all just by searching Buckeye Scoop on whatever your podcast platform of choice is. You can subscribe right there. Also leave us a 5-star rating and review. Finally, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. All of our podcasts are there. All of our player and coach and high school recruit and all that interviews, those are all there. Highlights, whatever. It's all there. youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Again, you can subscribe right there and then get notified every time we post a new video, so you don't need to just be sitting there at your computer refreshing it all day. You'll just get a little notification that says, hey, Buckeye Scoop just posted a great new video. Why don't you, look over your shoulder, make sure your boss isn't there, and then take 5 minutes for yourself. Treat yourself to a little Buckeye Scoop. Doesn't cost anything. All you have to do is subscribe at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.